In the spirit of the Tholos Circle, where ancient thinkers gathered to debate the issues of today, this is Tholos Talks. Through deep insight and thought-provoking dialogue, we offer the tools to decode complexity and illuminate the path forward.
Welcome back to Tholos Talks. This is episode 11 of our series exploring how technology, trade, and global business intersect and what it means for companies today. I'm Jake Jennings, Chair of Tech and Trade at Vaselina. Today's guest is someone whose work I followed closely for a long time because the institution he helps lead sits at a fascinating intersection of global telecom infrastructure, trade policy, and geopolitical competition. It's someone that I worked with. John, I'm embarrassed to say for me, it's been 20 years.
Yeah, we don't need to focus on the number of years, but I think it probably helps us reflect a little bit on the history of how we got to where we are today.
Absolutely. So John is the Chief Regulatory Officer at the Global System for Mobile Communications Association, better known as GSMA. Before joining GSMA, he spent 17 years at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, where he was the bureau chief of the International Bureau, and he served as the chief voice in bilateral and multilateral telecom negotiations. John, I could go on, but I think folks can read your bio. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to join you. Great to see you.
First of all, it's the first time I think I've ever read out what GSMA stands for. It is an acronym rather than the name. Tell our listeners, what is GSMA? What do you do kind of on your day-to-day work, and what are you best known for? Other than the wonderful party you guys throw in Barcelona every year.
Well, that is an important one, but yes, I think. Also, we never spell it out either these days. To be honest, I mean it's GSMA because, of course, we really founded upon this idea of unifying mobile ecosystem because we trace our history back to the Memorandum of Understanding in 1987, which was about 13 operators in 12 countries, European countries, that really committed around to deploying a common standard, GSM. And since then, every technology we now see is a descendant of that original technology. So we still have GSMA as the name, but of course, we don't want to create confusion as to where we are today. So of course, it started as European, but very shortly thereafter, it expanded. In '93, Telstra from Australia joined, and we were formed into the GSM Association, MOU Association, shortly after that. And that aim was really about supporting and protect and promoting mobile operators using GSM standard for cell networks. So our original purpose was really quite straightforward. It was about ensuring interoperability, ensuring scale for GSM, allowing customers to use mobile services seamlessly across borders where that standard was deployed. So as now next year will be a big year. It'll be 4 decades. So we've evolved quite a bit. Today we moved from 13 to 750 operators, basically in every country of the globe, as well as hundreds of other associate members from other parts of the digital ecosystem. We continue our advocacy work around promoting global seamless interoperability. And as you mentioned, we have Barcelona, so we're a global convener, global and regional convener. I just recently attended a regional event we did in the CIS countries in Uzbekistan. But obviously our showcase is NWC Barcelona, and it really does show the global interest around digital seamless communications. And of course, we do continue, not myself personally, but we continue as a technology organization that enables industry collaboration on standards, importantly on security, interoperability, fraud prevention, roaming, as well as future innovation. My day-to-day role, I have 2 roles, I should say. You mentioned I'm Chief Regulatory Officer, so I work with our members, but I also work quite a bit with government ministers, with international institutions, with regulators, really around trying to foster a policy and regulatory environment that really, advances the health, the sustainability of the sector, and that fosters investment and connectivity infrastructure. I also serve as the president of the GSMA Foundation, which is working to leverage digital technology and then the reach of mobile connectivity today to address development challenges as bring digital innovation and large-scale socioeconomic impact to underserved communities. We work globally, but I would say the bulk of our projects at the moment are in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia.
Thanks for that overview. And you reminded me, I can't believe I was struggling with. So GSM was the technology that, became the prevalent one. But at the time it was competing with, was it TDMA, and a few other technologies. So like if you went to another country, you basically had to buy a new handset.
Well, no, exactly. And I mean, I think you and I have both been around long enough to remember that, and that's, I think, what we need to remember. We've benefited from the harmonization and the scale that's come with the GSM deployment and the evolution of GSM. Because if we used to fly from Washington, D.C. to Tokyo, today you just take your phone and I mean, maybe at the most you get an eSIM, but your phone will just keep working, and you continue to function, you connect, you can do business. In the days of yore, we had to pay for and rent a separate phone. And I think it's important for us to remember that's what we need to avoid because I think we've really gotten to a point where we've reduced fragmentation as much as we can, and I think we should try to continue to remember the benefits that have come from that.
Yeah, I'm also kind of dating myself. I remember when PCS was first coming out, there was this whole debate like, well, what is it? Is it going to be a common carrier service? Is it a luxury good? Is it, how does it fit in? And now we kind of just take for granted that, wireless communications is, an essential part of universal service.
Yeah, I mean, it is the primary way that people today connect to the internet. Varies market to market, but it is the primary way that people connect to the power of the internet and to digital services.
Yeah, and then so you went from the GSMA or GSM standard, internationalizing that, and then you guys played a pretty big role. You mentioned in roaming. I also forget, without the clearinghouse and the standards from GSMA, it was almost impossible to roam on another carrier's network.
Yeah, I mean, that was a bit before my time at GSMA, but I think it obviously was, hugely important because it does promote this sort of global seamless connectivity. I mean, there were also some challenges and problems in the way roaming was commercially deployed, obviously, which we've had to deal with over the years. But I think we're in a very good position today to make, you take your phone, you hop on you make sure you have the right plan, of course, in some markets, and hop on the plane and you can continue as though you're at home.
Right. Or now even on the plane with satellite connectivity. It's,
Yes,
you
for
know,
better or worse, for better or worse.
exact.
Not about the satellite, about the being connected on the plane.
Yes. So I guess kind of continuing the standards discussion, there's a big event coming up next year, World Radio Conference. 6G is, all the buzz, even though we're still implementing 5G, globally. And then there's these other technologies that are taking place, both ORAN, which is the Open Radio Network Access standard, and then we're starting to hear more and more about AI in the network. Kind of walk our listeners through, World Radio Conference next year. What is GSMA focused on, and does this conference actually matter?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm afraid to say I've been involved in World Radio Conferences as a first. My first one was 1997. They happen every 3 to 4 years, and actually they are hugely critical for what we're talking about because the World Radio Conference has a conference in the name, but it's actually a treaty negotiation. It is where the radio regulations are negotiated and agreed. So these both, sorry, the global and the regional allocations, identifications, which are so critical to sending the signal to equipment vendors as to where people are going to deploy certain services. And that also, I think, importantly sends a message of where the scale will be. And so every World Radio Conference has been, critical to all users of the radio spectrum. So it's not just a question of mobile; it's a question of space science. It's a question of satellite services, the whole range of spectrum-based services. But for us, it's obviously critical because we see traffic growth year on year as a mobile industry. I mean, recently in the United States, for example, it's been 30% growth over mobile networks year on year. That requires investment and capacity. And part of that capacity, of course, is additional spectrum. And so we're going to be really pushing for identification of additional we call mid-band spectrum, sort of that balance between the lower frequency ranges, which have good coverage, and have a high frequency rate, which have very good capacity, but to get that balance in the middle. So we're going to be working quite closely with countries because it is actually a treaty negotiation. So it's countries that decide to hopefully identify more spectrum for mobile broadband, or IMT, as they call it in ITU speak, as the International Telecommunication Union. Um, and I think we actually, in this particular case, we're very aligned with some of the priorities of the U.S. in those negotiations. But also importantly, it will also address the way, a sort of a harmonized way of implementing direct-to-device services, so satellite connectivity to a mobile device, which I think is a hugely exciting opportunity and one that a lot of our members are very actively partnering with satellite companies for. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're managing the spectrum resource properly and not creating any risk of interference. So it's a balancing act, and I think there'll be important questions that will be addressed at WRC 27 on this.
It's interesting that, the standards cut both in terms of the technology, as you mentioned, the GSM technology, but also in the whether 700 megahertz, or you need a globally consistent spectrum allocation so that the vendors can basically write to the spec, so you don't have to have multiple radios in each handset.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the most important part of that is, I mean, okay, certain markets, yes, you could possibly deviate a bit, and that market is big enough to sustain it. But at the end of the day, it still drives at the cost. And we know, plenty of people are connected today, but there's still billions of people who are unconnected. And the biggest barrier to those who are not connected is not a question of coverage. We cover 96% of the world's population with mobile broadband. It's a question of being able to afford the device. So the more the device costs, the fewer people can access the service.
And is that where your work with the foundation also comes in?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important to make sure, and we're very focused. We've been working quite extensively. I mean, and again, the operators really prioritize this because the more people they have on their networks, the better, and the more opportunity they can bring connecting them, not just the connectivity for connectivity's sake, but like with mobile financial services and business services. I had the privilege of going the end of last year with the Secretary General, Doreen Bogdan Martin of the ITU, as well as the Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, Kelly Clements, to the border with Darfur in Chad, on the Chad side, obviously. And just to see sort of the power that a mobile device can give some of the most disenfranchised people in the world, it's very powerful. So I think, as we look at these questions of harmonization, scale, and affordability, I think we need to remember the opportunity that when we work together, we can bring the entire planet.
So that's interesting. On the one hand, focusing on connectivity and minimizing costs, but at the same time, I think we're seeing governments taking a national security approach to kind of the equipment vendors that are being used in the mobile market. How is that issue kind of percolated? I know we've seen the FCC, with their covered list. We've seen other countries identifying, risky vendors. Uh, how does that play out in GSMA's ecosystem and advocacy?
Yeah, so I mean, our baseline foundation is about global seamless connectivity, right? And making sure that we
But
maintain a common standard. And I think fortunately, when we talk about the standards process and 3GPP, I mean, obviously there's a different tenor in some of the discussions and there's some dynamics, but at its core, it's still about cooperating and driving to a common standard. Now, the issue of individual vendors of equipment, that's not necessarily a question of the standard. That's a question of the supplier. Um, I think that is around us. And of course, we have members from the United States, we have members from China, we have members from Korea, we have members from Brazil. So, we try to make sure that we are just simply providing a platform for everyone to come together. I think one of the things that I always highlight is, of course, a government responsibility to focus on national security. And I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to think that me at GSMA is going to change their mind on something. Like I can give them the data points that I think are relevant, but at the end of the day, it's their call and their responsibility of their citizens. So that's fair enough. I think one of the things we need to look at when we're looking at this question, however, is operators get so much scrutiny about the level of competition in our markets. even though we are always in hyper-competitive environments. The global vendor community is really consolidated in recent years. And if for various national security reasons you further exclude parts of that, it's simply a fewer number of vendors you can choose from. And then the question becomes, do those concerns you have outweigh then possibly the risk of higher costs because you have fewer suppliers? Again, that is a question for the governments to decide. And we just try to be that platform where everyone can come together. They can have a totally different view from another country. One operator can be different from another operator. But again, the important thing is not fragmenting the ecosystem.
So one of the things that kind of came out, I guess it was almost 10 years ago through the Linux Foundation, the open source community, was something called ORAN, which is Open Radio Network Access Standards. So basically ORAN allows you to swap out equipment at the remote terminal for different vendors. One of the focus was to help drive competition so you're not just locked in to a proprietary system. Has that issue kind of percolated throughout GSMA, or is that something off to the side that you're watching?
Oh, I mean, it's definitely something we focus on. It's something we've been very actively part of the discussions around, doing what we can to foster competition in the vendor ecosystem. A lot of our members very actively trial and work with different suppliers. I mean, I think obviously the advantage of an open RAN solution is that you can come in with parts of the network and put it together with other parts. So maybe there's more competition in the different aspects. I mean, there are challenges because obviously, when something is deployed with the full stack, it all comes from the same supplier. It all works together. There's IP issues. So it is complex. I think it remains something we continue to work with our members on and are interested in. But I think I'm not enough of an expert to know exactly where deployment stands these days. But I think conversations about the health of the competitive environment and maintaining the ones that are there, because some of them have their own challenges, I think is something we should all be thinking about.
No, and I think GSMA's long been known as this convening platform. We talked a little bit about Barcelona, but other than a massive party,
Yeah.
I think you've got hundreds of thousands of attendees. Impossible to get a hotel in Barcelona that week. Uh, what did you notice from this year's Mobile World Congress versus previous events?
Well, I mean, we did. We've obviously we are feeling very satisfied about that. Barcelona continues to be the key place where people come to do business in the mobile and digital ecosystem. Um, and we still had very strong attendance, even though you may know there was the start of the Gulf conflict the week of Barcelona, so there were certain travel limitations, but we still had well over 100,000 attendees in Barcelona, which I think goes to the point about the interest of the industry in continuing to work globally and having collaboration across the sector. I would say there were a couple of key takeaways I took, and I think actually our director general framed it pretty well in his opening keynote. I think you even teed up on some of these in your opening comments. One, I think, is completing the 5G journey. Um, and I would go into the other two, I would say maybe really, overcoming an AI challenge for the operators. And I think also tackling mobile security and online safety. Um, I think when we talk about completing the 5G journey, what I really mean is there's a lot more work to do to monetize the investment. And I think also to move, because, as we look at, we're already talking about 6G, but people don't want to invest in a new technology when they haven't been able to reap the benefits of the return on investment in the technology they've already deployed. So we got to be careful. It's just not um, you know, uh, a national industrial policy fight, that it actually is a commercially sustainable, viable technology that serves a benefit. But when we're looking at 5G, we're looking really for that monetizing the investment, but also moving to greater deployment of 5G standalone. It is only with 5G standalone, so the full stack is 5G, not just the radio access network, that you're unlocking the new use cases and really leveraging the benefits we highlight about 5G, the super low latency, that sort of thing. And I think we've seen in markets where 5G standalone adoption is at least 10%, that operators are seeing double the revenue growth compared to those without it. I think plenty of markets are well positioned. China, the US, in the well positioned, but I think if I remember right, the U.S. is about 25% 5G standalone. That might be slightly off. Europe is at 2%. So I think that's a challenge we all need to work on globally to make sure that because we're all doing business globally. We want to make sure we're dealing with markets that also have robust digital networks to support the full economy. I think also on the AI was everywhere, of course, as not to be, they're not a surprise. It really, I think, has the potential to be a growth engine for mobile industries. Um, it's really set to become, I think, the core intelligence behind the networks, how they're optimized, automated, monetized. Um, but I think there's some work to do. I think networks have to evolve to be able to really support AI workloads, which will require low latency, high uplink capacity. And of course, I think we're very well positioned, but I think this is where we can add value. But if we do it right, is edge computing. Um, uh, I think also, most deployments today are still assistive rather than autonomous with gaps in data, skills, architecture. Oh, another aspect I just to touch on AI, because I've been super pleased actually some of the leadership I've seen. I mean, you look at mobile network operators like VEON, which operates in a number of from Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. We talk AI. Most AI today, of course, is operating off models in either English, Chinese, lower resource languages, which really are key to making sure everyone can participate in AI, have greater challenges. So they've actually worked with, in their case, they worked with a Barcelona supercomputer to develop LLM around some of these lower resource languages, including Uzbek, including Kazakh. So I think, really, I think the proximity of the operators to their local communities makes them a unique player in the space that I think needs to be maximized. And I think also, finally, I mentioned this whole issue of tackling mobile security and online safety. And what I mean, one of the big issues here, of course, is the scam economy. I mean, we've all seen it. You see it in the US, we see it everywhere. It's grown probably better than any other sector over the past 5 years. I mean, it's costed victims, I think, globally about $1 trillion in 2024 alone. So I think this is a big priority for mobile operators. Um, Nobody benefits. We certainly don't benefit. I mean, the scammers benefit, but we're often maybe the interface that people have when it comes to the scam. Even often it's beyond our control because most of them are actually coming over um, social media platforms. But I think we need to make sure we're all, coming to the table and not just trying to pass liability from us to the banks, or the banks to us, or the social media platforms to anyone else. So I think what's really critical here, I think, is the dialogue to make sure that governments, when they're looking to tackle this issue, are not just focusing on the easiest locally licensed target, the operator. They're bringing everyone to the table because that's the only way you're going to solve this problem. And I think, we've seen operators doing what they can. I mean, our chairman, who is the CEO of Airtel, um, uh, has made this a major priority. He has developed in their networks an AI-driven spam detection system that's cut cyber crime incidents by about well over 14% and reduce customer losses by even more, about 70%. So I think a lot more to do, but that was definitely a big focus as well. I would say AI, 5G journey, and uniting against scams are really key aspects of Barcelona.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it just seems like yesterday, but it's really about 10 years ago. A lot of the fight was on net neutrality, some of the data localization, data flows, how the policy issues have really matured since then.
Yeah. I mean, some of those are still here, but yes, I think if anything, there's probably more policy. I think as the ecosystem has evolved to really be cutting across every sector of the economy, I mean, the criticality of the infrastructure is clear to government. So, um, the problem, of course, is often the default approach is what can we regulate here, as opposed to how can we work together to solve this problem. So I think that's one of our, one of the ongoing issues
And
for
who
us.
do I have authority over? Who did I license that I can go after?
Exactly. They know where to find you. They have local employees. I mean, and that's the thing, of course, with, a lot of these other digital players. I mean, you got to, travel to Silicon Valley or Shanghai to find them. So, but often they are the ones that you need to be working with to find the solutions.
So the other thing I want to kind of go back to is your comment about fully deploying 5G and I think you're right. Everybody gets caught up on what's next. Uh, you know, and as I understand it, they're still, working through the standards on 6G. It's unclear kind of how they're going to differentiate, the 6G standard. So you're really going to get that much lower latency. What are their issues? I'm just wondering from your conversations, what have you heard in terms of the shortcomings of 5G, why it's time to move, or are you hearing the opposite of, let's fully bake out 5G so that we've got, 85, 95% standalone coverage and then maximize its use?
Well, I mean, I think as we've seen, those countries that have greater 5G standalone deployment are doing better in terms of revenue growth. I think the problem is the starting point. The industry is healthy, but the returns are not where they should be for such an important sector, and a lot of that is a product of inadequate scale in markets. We see this. I mean, this is a big discussion in Europe right now with the merger review. You have 27 different markets trying to create the illusion of a single market, which doesn't yet exist. You have a general presumption that there should be four players in a market. But the number of subscribers per operator is so small as to make it impossible for some of these players to compete with the likes of a U.S. operator, a Brazilian operator, an Indian operator. So I think what we really, I probably lost track of your actual question, but I think one of the issues for making sure that 5G standalone comes is you need to solve the problems of why the industry is unable to invest right now, right? So those markets are already in a good investment position, the US being one, China being another, India being another, have more 5G standalone. So it's not really a mystery. And even if there may be revenue possibilities by greater 5G standalone deployment, you have to convince your investors that that makes sense. So I really think we need to do a little bit of the cleanup of the front end before you're going to get to those benefits that can truly come from full deployment of 5G standalone.
So I know we focused on kind of the mature markets, US, Europe, China. What are you hearing from kind of the developing countries, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or even the Pacific Islands?
Yeah. Well, I think they are markets that obviously hugely depend on the economies of scale. And so they want to be a part of the voice, and they want to make sure the spectrum decisions make sense also for their regions and their markets. Um, but I think importantly, they also don't want to just be artificially jumping to another level of technology. Use what you can of the technology you've deployed and invest and start to move. You're obviously moving maybe on a different time scale. You're going to eventually get there, but then reaping the benefits that have come from larger scale deployments elsewhere. I think the islands are a uniquely challenging environment, and one that we're very focused on. I think we are, we've been very active recently in the Caribbean, and we've been partnering quite a bit actually, in the Pacific, but very specifically on early warning systems. Because it's just one example of why mobile is so important in these environments where there are challenges for deploying it. But these early warning systems for natural disasters in the Pacific are hugely beneficial to the citizens. So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'd say the buoys to know, yeah, we've
Yeah,
got a tsunami.
exactly. And so then to be able to alert, to have the infrastructure in place so people know and can seek safety. So our Director General has been on the UN Secretary General's task force for early warnings. We've been very actively working with our partners and, of course, the vendors as well on trying to make sure that, particularly in these markets, some of these markets have just tens of thousands of people. We're not, there, we need to do what we can to help support them in their journey. But again, everyone is benefiting, I think, by the same technologies and the same equipment because of the scale. So I think, they're never going to probably drive completely the direction, but they want to be a part of that discussion so that ultimately what comes out is also serving their needs and their citizens' needs.
So going back to the WRC and the treaty negotiations, it's unique in that each country has one voice. So, you could have a small country, like Belize having an equal vote to the US or China. How do those discussions at the treaty WRC events play out? And I know they're focused on, the standards for the next G, whatever's coming out of the standards bodies, but there's also these thorny policy issues. So do those get raised as well?
I mean, there's always policy issues that come in. I mean, there's no UN meeting that happens without politics or geopolitics, and sometimes completely unrelated to the topic at hand. But that's the nature, and that's why, of course, the State Department from the U.S. will be there. It's not just a question of technical experts in communications. Obviously, there's the standards work that goes into defining, this next IMT generation, which then gets identified against her. So the WRC is really about identifying spectrum against that standard um, for use in the future, right? So it's internationally identified, and then it can then be deployed as appropriate by the countries. But in terms of the negotiations, so yes, it is a one country, one vote environment. I mean, obviously, some countries have hundreds of people and some have one that come to these negotiations that has an impact. But what's really my experience is all the negotiations don't happen, in this case in Shanghai, when that meeting happens. A lot of the negotiations happen in the preparatory meetings in the regions. So the African Telecommunication Union, CTEL in the Americas, APT in the Asia Pacific. So there's the RCC for the CIS countries. So a lot of there's regional blocks already that are aligned. They know who supports what and where they can come in and support each other. Now, often on the ground, you then have to compromise and agree where you can move. Um, but yes, I mean, if I mean, I've seen it before where if you ignore enough of the smaller countries have very important use of these, it will not serve your interest. You need to make sure you're bringing as many people along with you in the negotiations as possible.
So kind of looking forward beyond WRC, what do you think are going to be the most challenging issues in the next 5 to 10 years for the industry?
That is a very good question. I mean, I think that the big one, of course, is maintaining scale. I think that the ability of making sure that that countries understand the importance for their own leadership to make sure that their operators are healthy and sustainable and able to deploy the services that their citizens expect. So I think that would be a big one. I think also continuing to look at how to maximize the value proposition of AI for mobile networks in the next generation. We already see huge uses in terms of optimization of networks, energy efficiency, but I think there's a lot more potential, and it just requires. I think one of the issues for us as the mobile industry is, we're not just one company. We are 750 operators working in markets of different scale, different economics, and also often a different range of service offerings. I mean, there's mobile operators, but they often sometimes provide content services, others do not. So, I think trying to keep the industry together and unified, much as we did with GSM, will make sure we can add the maximum value going forward.
So kind of based on that, what are the one or two recommendations you have to policymakers?
I think a couple of them, I'll share off the top of my head here. I think one is we need to stop regulating for the market we remember from 20 years ago and focus on the dynamic today. Because, we see this right now. I mean, we're having a big discussion in Europe on the Digital Networks Act, the merger review, et cetera. There's a great element of the Digital Networks Act. They're really forward looking in their proposal on spectrum and spectrum management, much similar to sort of an approach that the US is currently taking. Um, but in other aspects, it's just consolidating a bunch of old reporting and obligations. And simplification is not just putting it all in one place. It is about making sure that you reduce the regulatory burdens. Yes, obviously, you want to make sure consumers are protected, but it doesn't mean you need to anticipate every single thing that has happened in the 20 years ago and put it all into one bucket. So I think I would really encourage them to, and also think about the role that other players are playing. I mean, I think one of the big challenges, and we've had this debate, and it's been quite a contentious debate, is 85% of investment in mobile network, in the mobile internet connectivity, comes from mobile operators. but we don't reap 85% of the benefit. There's a few global players who reap the maximum benefit and yet invest very little, if anything, in the national markets where the infrastructure is deployed. So I think we need to start looking at how can we make sure everyone is playing their part in ensuring that there's robust network infrastructure for everyone, regardless of what markets they're in.
Right. And that does remind me of the net neutrality debate, but it sounds like it's also kind of matured in that sense of looking more from like a funding perspective.
I mean, I was at the FCC, of course, when we had the net neutrality discussion, and um, I think, and no one disagrees, and operators don't disagree. No one has a benefit of, keeping people from going where they want to go on the internet. But I think the issue is really about protecting and preserving the opportunities for, the innovator starting up something in the garage. Not the world's largest, most financially profitable companies, which, right, great for them because the innovation, the investment, we benefit as well. We all are very fond of that. But I do think that the landscape now is about how can we all benefit? What role can we all play to make sure that the networks that also they will depend on for the eyeballs that look at their services are as robust as they can be? And, I think it's also exciting now as we look at the connectivity that we can see from the potential for direct-to-device with satellite, because, there's been a huge pressure for operators to often consider deployment in areas that aren't economically sustainable. Someone goes on a hike once a year in the mountains and they don't have connectivity. Well, it doesn't make sense to build a full network there. But if we can find ways to partner with some of these satellite companies and provide, continuous service, and also perhaps also more importantly, make sure you have service in the case of emergencies in these areas, all the better for the benefit of users.
One final question. Any predictions for Mobile World Congress or WRC next year?
Well, for MWC, I know it will be successful again. I hope you're all comment. I hope you're there, Jake. But for WRC, yeah, I mean, I've been to many, and I think there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of posturing that comes in. I think at the end of the day, everyone recognizes the value of a lot of the radio services they depend on, and they will make sure there is a positive outcome. My general experience is we get a balanced outcome that meets the needs. So we're going to be pushing for additional spectrum, 4.5, 7 gigahertz. The US, I think, is pushing similarly. Hopefully we can convince others to come along on that journey and make sure the spectrum is there. Because as I said, US 30% growth year on year. We need to make sure we have the spectrum in 2035 and 2040 so that the networks are at capacity.
I think the one safe prediction is traffic growth will be constant.
And probably more than we expect.
Oh, always. It literally is the hockey stick. John, I really want to thank you for joining us today. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Where we have all benefited, and I think you and I know this because we saw what came before, is I think our greatest achievement is not about any particular technology generation. It is about continuing to work around a shared and common standard that is now connecting billions of people. And that means billions of people have the same, whether they're in urban or rural areas, if they're connected, they have opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have. So I think that should really be our guiding principle in everything that we're trying to do in mobile connectivity.
It's been amazing to watch you on this journey. I remember one small story, John, from our days at the FCC. I think you had just become bureau chief, the international bureau. I was out for a run. I remember my phone ringing. Yes, I was an idiot running with my phone. And it's John Giusti. Oh, hey, what's up? Hey, the chairman's sending me to this OECD meeting. I think I leave tomorrow. Any suggestions on what we should do?
Excellent. I don't even remember what meeting that was, but I'm sure I was highly effective.
Oh, I know you are. John, all seriousness, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. For our listeners, stay with us for future conversations on the people, policies, and partnerships shaping the global economy. To learn more about Basilina's work at the intersection of trade, technology, and global business, email me directly at jake.jennings@basilina.com.
Thank you for listening to Tholos Talks, a series by the Basilina Institute. Available on Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Make sure to follow and subscribe to our channels to stay up to date on upcoming episodes. To learn more about these topics or the work we're doing, visit the Basilina website.